Welcome to the Jedi Chronicles series. The host today is Master Yao, founder of the Grand Trine system. He is a Tantra extraordinaire and accomplished in several natural life systems. After completion of the Amarha project in 1997, he was raised to the rank of Master. He was later inducted into the International Circle of Masters. Master Yao is the author of 6 published books and many private select manuscripts. I've known Master Yao for 2 years now, and in that time he has helped me become the best version of myself possible. And I hope you really enjoy this series.
Good morning. This is Master Yao, and this is the first episode of the Jedi Chronicles. I grew up on a farm next to my grandfather's place. I was a strange little kid, empathic, intuitive, and from a very early age, I just felt that something was wrong, that something was going on in the world, something wasn't right. And this stayed with me most of my early life. I felt like black people in America had forgotten something. That's the best way to put it. And I just felt that we needed to remember. I was very obsessed with going to Africa from before I was a teenager. I was obsessed and I was determined to go. I was definitely going. Because I felt like the thing that was missing, we had some cousins over in Africa, and I felt that they would know, they would remember some of them. So when I was 20, I left on a ship and I traveled to Africa. I got ridiculed for doing that. A lot of people thought I was kind of crazy, but I really just felt strongly about what I felt. And I got there. I spent 90 days there. At some point in time there, I came in contact with 4 shamans all together at the same time. It was a really weird kind of a thing. It was a very profound experience for me. And they confirmed everything that I had suspected. And they started me down the path of remembering. They started me down the path of trying to put that puzzle back together again. Blacks had left something important behind after they got out of slavery. They did a lot of good stuff, but there was something important that they needed to remember, and they didn't remember anymore. And don't ask me how I knew, but I knew. And so that was sort of like the beginning of a change in my life. After college, I was not secure. Again, it was this feeling that I had. Of course, I went to an all-white college, and they tried to drum me out the whole time I was there. But they began setting traps for me in society as soon as I got out of college. I got a nice job at a corporate thing, and on the second week on that job, I just knew these guys were trying to, sabotage me, that there was no way they were going to let me succeed based on my abilities. And you could just see them. It wasn't going to be quick. It was going to be covert, but they started putting things in place so that when time came for, my appraisals and promotions and things like that and all that kind of stuff, that there would be little stuff, little traps sitting there waiting for me. When I got out of college, what I was facing was entrenched racism, a serious feminist agenda with black women, police just rank dishonesty and profiling and all this kind of stuff. There was poverty on my side of town that was just, I grew up in the country, and when my first job, I was in New York City, downtown. And that was a beast of a place that ate little country boys for breakfast. So I didn't feel secure at all. There was a bunch of guys that came before me, and these were smart guys, some of them smarter than me, I guess, charismatic, bright future, good upbringing, and they fell, a lot of them. It was like an obstacle course, and a lot of black men that started didn't finish. I mean, it was a landmine landscape that we were facing when we got out of college and started corporate life. And a lot of them, even in 4 or 5 years after they started, they just didn't make it. You know, a bunch of us were meeting one night, having drinks and talking. We had all just started corporate jobs. We'd all graduated from different colleges, but about the same time. And it was in the fall, I believe, and one of the guys was just making a comment, kind of like just off the cuff, and he said, to survive in corporate America as a black man today, you need to be a superhero. And you know, I thought about it, and everybody kind of nodded their heads like, yeah, pretty much. And the thing stuck with me. But I didn't take it the way everybody else took it. I thought, you know, well, maybe there really is a way to do that. I mean, my cousin committed suicide, and he took his wife with him. And there was a lot of other black guys that, you know, they started out good, but the police, they got into the courts, and the judges just, you know, there was no justice at all. Not even close. The divorce courts, the politicians, banks, media, credit bureaus, you name it, you know, boom. You're out there doing good, trying to do good, racing that race, and bam, they snatch you by the ankles, and you got to go backwards. Black men were constantly being victimized. There was no security in it. There was no security in a job. There was no security in nothing. And that's when my Jedi journey began. Of course, I'm speaking in metaphors. I didn't really know what I was trying to become at that point, but I was trying to become something extraordinary, because that's what I felt was required. I was like, being smart's not enough, being wealthy is not enough, all of this stuff that we had, it just wasn't enough. And my thing was, I'm not going down like the others. No. When they corner me and they come to get me, I need some kind of secret weapon, or, you know, disappear, or something that would give me like this edge and help me survive. And the reason that I was feeling that way is because when I was like 6 years old, something bad tried to happen to me. That was a situation where I was like, oh, this is not going to end well. And something intervened. It wasn't me, but something intervened. I'm not going to say what it was, but I'm just going to say that the bad thing that was trying to happen to me didn't happen. No, not at all. And as a consequence of that event, which was, you know, happened real quick, and I was like, okay, it changed me in a way it's hard to explain. Let's just put it this way. I already knew a little something about the extraordinary life that can happen to you in life. And after that point, I was no longer afraid of ghosts. I remember being a little bit skitty about, you know, looking out, going out in the dark and all that. After that, ghosts didn't bother me. The truth of the matter is, ghosts were afraid of me. And if you understood what happened, if I told you the whole story, you would understand why. And so I knew that something extraordinary was possible. I didn't have enough, but I was like, if I could explore this. So from that moment forward, you know, after we had that talk, I don't remember the exact date, but from that point on, I started looking for the extraordinary, the unusual, the secret stuff. Something to explain what happened to me, but more so, I felt that there was something out there, a holy grail, if you will, a philosopher's stone, something that was going to give me the ability to survive and maybe even thrive in a world that basically, you know, didn't want me. And so that's the story that we're going to be telling over the next few months in these Jedi Chronicles. We're going to tell you the story about what happened after I started this journey. I didn't know where I was going, what I was really looking for, not really. I had an idea. I had some places to look and certain people that I said, you know, once I get situated, I'm going to go see these people because I know they're into some, you know, fringe kind of stuff. But I didn't really know what a Jedi really was, you know. I mean, metaphorically, the Jedi, you know, is trained and he can do all of this really neat stuff. And so that's what I called it. It was a metaphor for trying to get out of the restrictions that I was in. And if there was anything that would elevate me up a little bit, that's what I was going to become. So I called it, you know, my Jedi journey. These are the chronicles of that journey, because you can, as you can imagine, it didn't turn out like I thought it was going to turn out. Not at all. It turned out better, but very different. You know, I guess a major milestone in my early parts of my journey was the discovery that teenagers did not finish puberty. You know, I'm looking for one thing over here, and you find something over here that's different, you know what I'm saying? And so, you know, I came to the realization, hey, teenagers don't finish puberty. I learned about puberty, and basically, the physical part of it was just part of it. There was a lot of like software in the brain, in the body, in your reproductive system that didn't get downloaded. So, you know, we got the organs and the breastises and all that kind of stuff, and a little bit of arousal programming and stuff like that. But the serious part of puberty, that was a lot of stuff that was supposed to come into our being then. It just didn't. Most people became 21, they became adults. They looked like adults. They had never finished puberty. And I'm telling you, this was a major, major piece. And so one of the first tasks I had to do as a Jedi in training, you know, a self-training Jedi, was to go back and finish puberty. And what happened with that is my sex game got kicked up, upgraded a few notches. That's not what I was trying to do. But I mean, hey, I was like, okay, I'll take it, you know. And I didn't know that certain things were connected to certain other things. It kind of like, I was like, okay, well, really? And so when I started completing my puberty program, in other words, activating more of my male versus female DNA, some stuff came alive in me that I didn't know was there. And it definitely affected my sexual performance, definitely, in more ways than one. And that's when I first began to understand that this whole journey was a lot more than what I thought it was going to be. That I was thinking, you know, there was a secret cave someplace or a secret house, and there was a little chest with all the secrets in there, you know. And and I would get in there one day and read all the good stuff. But that little cave, that little chest, that little room, you know, the more I started digging into the extraordinary, the more I found it was like a giant house getting bigger every time. And after a while, it was like a big mountain of secrets and extraordinary knowledge and all kinds of connected stuff that was branches going all under the ground, under this mountain of knowledge. And I was trying to find where's the good stuff at that I needed to know. My Jedi journey really started getting interesting. The first few months after I started this journey, while I was, you know, looking into all the branches from the second puberty and some of the other things that I learned, I had to do what I called face the mirror. And facing the mirror is like, from reading some of the things I read and talking to some of the wiser, older people that were mentoring me, I was like, who am I? You were supposed to get a realistic view of yourself and discard all of these illusions about yourself that other people had given you in the media. And I had this big corporate job, so you're like, yeah, I'm important. Well, no, not really. So when I really thought it through, who was I? I was the great-grandson of a slave and a Native American woman. So, I really analyzed things, and I was saying, you know what? I'm at the bottom coming up. I'm at the bottom climbing steps up. I'm not at the top coming down. That's where I was in society. I asked myself, where was my power base? I didn't really have one. Money wasn't power. My friends, iffy. When you really needed them, they weren't there. And they were subject to switching at any point their allegiance. You couldn't count on them. Relationships, more of a liability than an asset. I'm just breaking it down like it really was. So I didn't have a power base. So I was like, about the only thing that I could consider a true power base that nobody could take away from me was spirituality, spiritual power, which I didn't have a lot of it yet. That's how the thing started the first year. I faced the mirror, and I came to some pretty stark and raw observations about myself, and I tried to change. The next thing, I turned from looking inside myself to out at the world, and that was an ugly picture. I mean, at that age, 24, 25, I was having a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. I loved New York, I just did, but the reality of what was really going on around me was very, very ugly. I mean, the world was filled with lies. Nobody was telling the truth. No, it was a bunch of facades. I lived in like this lake or this pool, and the surface of it looked beautiful, mist rising up. And you're like, oh, the lake is so beautiful. And then you take your head and you like dip it below the surface, and then you see all these sharks under there. And all kinds of monsters and all kinds of filth and garbage and pollution. And it's like, oh, let's not go back down there. But then all of your body was under there. That's where your boat was or whatever. That was the real world, what was under the surface. And you looked up above the surface and everything looked beautiful. The ladies in the tight dresses, going down the street. You saw the money, the nice signs, but that was the facade, that was the illusion. The world was one big lie, and it still is. It's even worse. I mean, the scope of the lies was just vast, beyond your imagination, at least beyond mine, growing up in a little country town. I mean, black men who were bad were punished, which is what you would expect. But what I realized is that black men who tried to do good were punished even harder. Think about that. The media said, the law is just. This is a country of laws. We're all trying to abide by the law here. That's a lie. And black women said, nothing but lies. We want a man who's going to be, honorable and good and treat us good and who's going to do right. We want a man who's going to love us so much that love us enough to marry us, and we're going to have this great happiness. No. That's what guys did then when they were 24, 25. They got a good job, they found a woman, they married her, and they thought they were going to live happily ever after because they believed what was in those magazine articles, what was in those blogs. Black men believed it, and they paid the price. Those same women divorced those men. I mean, they cheated on them while they were married to them. They got upset for whatever reason. Things didn't work out, and they divorced them. They took their money. And I guess the worst thing that they did was, the second worst thing that they did is they took their children. They divorced these black men from their very bloodline. It's cold-blooded. That's assassin level stuff. And then the final thing, the worst thing, is they turned around and blamed the men that they had just jacked. And I was like, whoa. I saw this happening over and over again. This was a white media thing, That's what the white media did, you know. Blacks in apartheid South Africa, it's their fault that this is what's happening. You know, blacks over here, it's their fault that this didn't happen the way they want. The police shoots a black man, it's the black man's fault. He shouldn't have pulled his, you know, his gloves out of his pocket, you know, and all this kind of stuff like that. And you know, black women were starting to adopt these same practices. The black man becomes a victim, the black woman blames him. And it was some cold-blooded times, my friend, it was cold-blooded times. I said to myself, how could sane women make such a choice to do that? Or the other side of the thing, what was men doing to women that solicited this level of deviousness? And then I thought, maybe it's neither. What is society doing to them both that this was the case? I mean, black men were getting blamed for being victims. My friend got a woman pregnant. He claims that, you know, she was supposed to be using birth control and stuff, and she purposely stopped and didn't tell him. So he thought she was not going to have the baby, but he looked up a few months later, she had the baby, and he was in family court. Next thing you know, he had a big old garnishment on his check. And he basically had been turned into an 18-year paycheck. Nothing he could do about it. His family and his friends blamed him, and future black women that he tried to date blamed him. You know, he turned into a baby daddy. And that was not in his plans at all. Another guy was racially profiled by the police. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Police stopped him several times, and finally they pinned something on him anyway. And they gave him a ticket. They gave him a ticket again. And, you know, he paid the tickets and he tried to stay within the boundaries of the law, but he ran one of these red light camera things, and if they sent a notice, they didn't send it to him where he was living at the time. I don't know the whole details of it, but what I know is he didn't know he had gotten a ticket. And the next thing you know, his insurance, a new insurance company, you know, were like double, triple the rate. He couldn't keep up with the payments. He lost his car, and then because he lost his car, he lost his job. And, you know, he was not really trying to do anything wrong. I don't know all of the details of it, but basically the system jacked him. And women after that blamed him. You don't got, you know, you living with this person, you living on this person's couch, you doing this, you doing that, you're a scrub, you're a this, you're a that. And they blamed him for that. Nobody blamed the system for it. And, you know, his psyche was damaged as a consequence of that. And it really changed the way he dealt with the world after that, you know. My cousin shot a man. The guy tried to break into his house. My cousin, who had once been a policeman, was armed in his bedroom, asleep, when the guy broke in. I mean, they literally just, you know, messing with the front door, and he heard it, and then he heard the door open, and he came walking out of his bedroom, and there's an armed white man there trying to steal stuff. They were moving around, and then he got a good shot, and he shot him. And the guy dropped his gun, and I guess he fell outside. And because he fell outside, the police came and tried to say that he was shot outside. But you know, that was a trail of blood. They cleaned it up. It never got admitted to court. The police testified that the guy shot the guy outside his house, shot him illegally, and that the guy, you know, they never got a chance to admit into evidence that the man had broken into the house. The judge just blocked the attorneys from doing a lot of stuff. The white guy got off. He never went to jail. The black guy, my cousin, ended up going to jail for like 3-4 years. And after he got out of jail, his license was hit. He couldn't get a job easy, and he couldn't vote. And that's how black men were being victimized. A little here, a little there, but the point I'm trying to make is that black women blame them, and even their families sometimes blame them for a system that's corrupt, that's set up to entrap you. that there was no support, none. You know, your girlfriends don't wait for you if you go to jail. Everybody say they're going to, no they don't. The biggest thing the problem is this whole redirection of blame. You know, this is a white thing, white media thing, where they're doing all this evil and they don't want the blame to come back on the people actually doing it. So they redirect the blame to somebody else, normally somebody white. But if it's something it's a black issue, then, you know, the police shoot you and they shouldn't have shot you, they direct the blame to the black guy. And so black women picked up this habit and started doing it. And that's the real problem with this, is that it created a situation in our society, in our community, where the people making the mistakes, doing the evil, were not held accountable because black women didn't blame them. And in some cases, black men too messed up and didn't blame the right person. And it led me to this whole discussion of the alpha male and the beta male. I'm in my late 20s, and you know, these subjects and topics are coming up, and I'm trying to make heads or tails of it. You know, I got a nice job, corporate America, working in New York City. I'm driving, you know, Mercedes or something like that at the time. It was a brand new, you know, high-end car. I'm living in a really nice, you know, well, I'm living in a mansion, but I hadn't finished fixing it up yet. It was still rough, you know, it still had some stuff that needed work, but, you know, I'm in a nice part of town. And when I was with a woman, when I had a girlfriend, she was usually fine and sexy, like, you know, yeah. But I did not consider myself an alpha male at all. My friends thought I was an alpha male. The women thought I was an alpha male. I did not. I mean, I had 32 people working under me in the line, but I had 350 managers over top of me on the way up to the president. You know, my budget was like in the millions, but my salary, I hadn't hit 100,000 yet. So I didn't own no factories, no big stocks, a lot of them anyway, no heavy duty assets. I didn't own any malls. So I considered myself not an alpha male, but I didn't consider myself a beta male either, and so I wasn't really sure what I was. When I got, you know, into that upper 20s kind of bracket, women switched up on me. At first, they all seemed like they were trying to marry me. Then women switched. And the next thing you know, women were after the beta males, not the alpha males. So I found out, you know, that I could still get a lot of sexual action, could get a lot of yoni. A lot of women were checking for me for the booty call, but they didn't really want to marry me. And you know, at first I was like, wow, that's kind of weird, but what had happened was, as women got older, they started talking, comparing notes. You see all these magazine articles and stuff. The women started looking for beta males because they could control them. They figured they were going to be less likely to cheat, less likely to get out of hand. And so you saw all these little cutie pies running around dating these nerdy guys, especially the IT guys. They were making good money. They were caught up in their work. And, you know, they went right down to the altar. But after the marriage, the women were wearing the pants in the family. The man was wearing the dress. And so on the surface of society, you see this, you know, one thing. You look beneath the surface of that pool, and it's not what it was like, what it looked like. Nothing was what it seemed at first. Everything was like an illusion in life, in this society. It was just a fabric of lies. And I was learning as a young Jedi to really see what's really under there and how to really deal, how to, you know, predict when it was coming for you. It was good stuff. In spite of my bedroom skills, you know, I realized I really didn't know women that well. Not really. You thought, okay, well, you're an alpha male, you got this going on, you know, everybody's going to be in your corner. No. The reason that women was attracted to me was very different from what I thought it should be, being a naive country boy. And I especially noted that, you know, the professional, upscale kind of women, more and more the older I got, were moving away from me. They were not getting, you know, I was less of an interest to them. And I found that the inner city women, the poorer class of women, the less, the suburban women were, boom, they were moving away. The inner city girls were seeking me out. They were where I was. If I went someplace, there's a bunch of inner city women. And basically what was happening is, you think that they're attracted to you. They're trying to get you to have their baby. Because they're looking at you and they see an 18-year meal ticket. And so, you know, it took me a while to figure out the game, but, you know, it wasn't ever what you thought it was. You know, you're trying to find somebody that cared about you, had your back, ride or die, all of that. No, not there. It just wasn't there. It's like, you know, after a while, as I approached 30, I felt like every ejaculation was like rolling the dice in Vegas. Like, you didn't know what was happening. And eventually I had to move, you know, as a consequence of that, because it was still hard not to make those trips to the hood, because, you know, they just made it hard to resist. You know, once I did just about get to 30, you know, I was really starting to learn a lot about occult things, science, natural science, health, healing, psychology, all that kind of stuff like that, and other things. And, you know, the more I learned about women, the less I knew. One of the things that I discovered was that females prejudge men in every respect. But I never really knew just how dysfunctional American women are until I went overseas. I was making these trips. The trip that I went on at 20 was just the first trip. I was making, you know, regular trips overseas. And what I found was, you know, when you got to these indigenous cultures, the old world cultures, and cultures that were semi-modern, you know, they were trying to be modern, but they hadn't caught up with the United States yet. The women had not learned yet at that point in time. They were getting there, but they hadn't learned how to be, you know, westernized. The Western woman over here, they had all of these preconceived opinions about what men are, what they do, what they're going to do, how they're going to react to this. They had all these rankings. They had all of this, you know. When you met a woman, before you opened your mouth, they already knew how you were supposed to react, what you were supposed to say, how you were supposed to approach them. And they had already come up with all these categories, all these ratings and rankings, and how they were going to react to you. And they had this all, you know, in a package in their brain, which they rehearsed all the time. So, you know, the woman in this society, they have a large access to information. There's a bunch of information out there. And so they just assumed they were right. When you opened your mouth and started talking, they never listened to what you said. They already knew what you were supposed to say. And so what they were doing was mapping what you're saying to see if what you said matched what they knew you were supposed to say. And if it didn't, then you were lying. They didn't care about who you really are. That was like, they were like, okay, it's like you're interviewing for a job and you're trying to put on a good face. They were not paying attention to what you said or to that face. They were basically, we already know who you are and what you do and what you're about. And so this is what you are, what you're about, and you can say what you want. It's not changing what we believe. And so women did not listen. And I remember getting to the point just right before my 30th birthday, where it was very frustrating trying to talk to women because they did not communicate. They basically interviewed you to see what, where the flaws were in your character and your program and your story. And it's like, okay. I stopped, I just, basically unplugged from that, and I used to just basically talk to women like a puppet type of thing, where I just sort of repeated or echoed what they were saying. And if I started dating a woman, I didn't tell her anything truthful about me. I didn't even try. I didn't try to have any real communication. I basically waited for them to prejudge something I was going to say, and then I checked them hard. If they did it too many times, I just stopped messing with them. It was too aggravating. And what I did was I had to purge them. I had to reprogram them. And it took a couple of months to do that. Anytime that they said anything, where they were trying to steer your answers into a certain place, that this is what you're about, I know what you're about, then I would, basically slap their hand and stop the conversation and tell them to think about what they were doing, and then pick it up an hour later and see if they could make the adjustment. And it usually took about 2 months before they actually had real conversations with you. I learned how to do this by going overseas, because when I was overseas, women had real conversations. You'd be sitting there talking, they would answer the question you asked them with no attitude, no preconceived notions. And I'd be like, wow. And then I would say something to them, and so they would listen to what I said and base their next thought, action, question on that. They wasn't trying to, come up with all of these preconceived templates that you were supposed to fit into. And, I got used to women talking, having actual real grown-up conversations overseas. When I came back to the U.S., of course you had to go back to that same old format where words were like a battle, where you're like, women basically just kind of like, they would poke you with words. They was like trying to get you to catch you in a lie, trying to get you to think a certain way, trying to modify your behavior. And there was no real conversation. It was very rare. It was very disheartening. Another big thing that came up, was this whole concept that was repeated so often, as I was approaching 30, of the only thing black men are interested in is sex. Very disturbing. That's a heck of a slur. I mean, that's a very malicious thing to say about a people. And, it just wasn't true. It just wasn't true at all. I mean, black men to me were the most hard-working men I knew. From my father, my grandfather, and most of the men that were associates of mine growing up, as a young adult. I think he's the most spiritually inclined man that I know, without question. I think he's the most creative man I know, and you see that in the arts and sports and civil service and things like that. The black man is always trying to make a way where this very hard path to walk. And they're the most likely men of all races of men to get married. They don't stay in the family because, the women forced them out. And so I think it's real unfair that they slur them like that. And, I think women do that is to have some kind of a fault to hold over his head, again, to make beta males do what they want them to do. And that's low. It's real low. Because if you think about it, relationships today are very difficult to navigate. They really are, for everybody, men and women. And so, it's not like it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, most adult people were in relationships most of the time, probably married. That's not the case today. Today, more people at any given time, over 21, are not in a relationship than are in a working, functioning relationship. So you got all these people running around who spend a lot of time at home, and that, they're going to want to be with somebody from time to time. So yeah, men are going to be, out looking for sex. On any given Friday, it's going to be a lot of them. I don't know what the percentage is, I don't care. But to then label them as saying, because you're a high percentage of the time men are looking for sex, that that's their only interest and they're somehow deviant for doing that is evil. Because the women are just as much looking for sex. I mean, it's shameful and insulting when I heard that so often. And the flip side of that is, if you're familiar with my book, Awakening the Master Masculine, you know that there are 4 archetypes of male energy. That's the warrior, healer, hunter, eagle, right? And we say early in the book that if you don't have 2 of those archetypes online, you're not really ready for a relationship. And most men, black men included, when they become adults, they only got 1 archetype active and functioning. So I mean, today relationships are difficult to navigate, and part of what's happening is so many men are running around here with 1 or no archetypes functioning, trying to be in relationships. Well, if that's the case, you shouldn't be in a relationship. It's better for you to just have sex every once in a while you're working on yourself, and don't try to get into a complicated, difficult relationship that you're not ready to navigate yet. So if you're expecting men to try to have a relationship with every woman they bed, that would create a massive problem. Men know that they're not ready. And then the other side of that is, the women would have to bring a lot more to the table too. A lot of them think they're ready for this relationship. They're not. So if men are very interested in sex without associating it with some type of a commitment or some type of relationship, part of it is because they're not ready, and the other part of it is because the women aren't ready either. And they both need to work on themselves before they think that they're ready for a relationship. Most people are not. And so there's women that are spreading this slur need to stop. And as a Jedi, I saw so often that, people have these false beliefs, and their actions are making it worse. Because when you see a man who's very, I call it thirsty, who's very obsessed about sex, it's a very small percentage of men, white or black. And really, most of it is because they don't have their healer archetype energy online. And oftentimes they don't have anything online. And those men have a hard time getting access to yoni. They don't know what to do with it when they get it. And they're very awkward people, they're not developed and mature emotionally. So yeah, they're walking around here thirsty, and every time they see a woman, they're like, oh, let me run over there and try to get her number. But you shouldn't be, downing these men. If you see a man in the desert and he's thirsty, you don't kick him in the nuts and then say, well, you thirsty bastard, and then throw him down and throw some sand over him. You give him a little sip of water, and you teach him how to dig a well, so he stop being thirsty and bothering you. That's the way to deal with that. And I think that we're, passing judgment on people so often, and, instead of picking men up, we're digging the hole deeper for them. The Jedi thing for me, that whole thing of, the first few years and finding out about all these lies and stuff, it made me see what a lot of these problems were coming from. Yes, they were coming from the politicians and from the economy and things like that. But a lot of them were not able to overcome some of this stuff is because we were too busy living this crisis of lies within our own society and pulling each other down and kind of doing this whole thing of, my thing ain't perfect, so I'm gonna torpedo your ship. My ship is it's not really moving that fast. It's just barely, it's not doing much. There's not a lot of wind in my sails. So I'm going to send a torpedo over there to you so you're slowed down too. And then eventually what happened is everybody's putting all this negative juju on people, either in an occult fashion or in a political fashion or in a financial fashion. And after a while, the entire fleet of ships, the entire population, is just barely moving along. My journeys overseas, you know, I had to make a lot of them. And there was a lot of occult stuff going on with me too, which, you know, I can't get into that too deeply, but, you know, in order to move the force, if you want to call it that, or to do those kind of things, there's a lot of occult knowledge that you need, a lot of juju stuff, a lot of, you got to know about the realms of being, the tree of life, this kind of stuff like that, you know. I mean, before you can deal with energy and energy fields, there's just certain things you got to know. And a lot of that stuff I started to learn from traveling abroad. You know, I was training with people from time to time and doing things, and, you know, it was real stuff. We weren't talking about no fantasy stuff. It was real stuff that had applications in the real world. And, you know, this whole Jedi journey that I was on turned into something big. You know, I was kind of laughing about it in the beginning, you know, when I came up with the concept, the metaphor of, I'm going to try to study to be a Jedi. It was like a kind of like a little joke of mine, but, you know, the more I stayed with it, the more I realized that, wow, there's a lot of extraordinary stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff happening that it's not a joke at all. And I came face to face with so many indigenous cultures and their holy men, their medicine men and things like that. I came face to face with old world cultures, people who were trying to be modern, but they hadn't gotten there yet. They were still in the old dynamic of doing things. They weren't indigenous, but they had not adopted modern technological stuff yet. You know, they just didn't, they wasn't there. They were still clinging to the old culture. What happened to me from that interaction was that I discovered that they had lied to me about these people. They basically were painting them as if they were backward, barbaric types of people who are not really contributing to the modern world like they should, you know. They painted them as religious fanatics or as, you know, people practicing some weird natural voodoo or something that was spooky and you know, prehistoric. But that was not the case at all. Most of the people in old world cultures and indigenous cultures were way more culturally developed than the people in the so-called modern world. And, you know, in terms of everything, their medicine, their healing, their way of men and women relating, their economy, their society, how they had fun, their entertainment. It was very sophisticated and very well thought out, and it was not archaic or backward at all. In fact, the opposite was true. I understood then that the modern culture was the one that was deficient, and that the technology and the science had actually, you know, took society in a step back, not forward. It was convenient, and yeah, you had really good weapons and stuff like that, and you had trains and cars and spaceships and all that stuff like that. But in terms of what it did for life, it really didn't increase or improve life in the societies at all. In fact, since the 1800s, when it hit that tipping point, the industrialization of the world had been plunging the world into a state of decline, which was ever increasing in speed. When I came into, you know, the realization of that, it was a shock to me to realize that we were speeding down this path of technology rapidly, And it was taking us down into this abyss of one problem after the other, because we had left the real culture, the old world culture, behind. And that's where all the solutions were. That's how you manage society. That's how men get along with each other, how nations get along with each other. All of that science, all of that natural science, we had abandoned. And we were just dealing with the science of how to make cell phones and how to make bread cheaper, even though it wasn't better. We had all of this technology, but it was all centered around money. It wasn't centered around humans. And people just couldn't see that. We were making better and better cars, but they did not serve the humans better. Not really. They were not dealing with the things that humans really needed. And I guess what I learned from fantasy movies is that the old world culture and the new world culture of technology and machines were not meant to compete. They were meant to be side by side. But something happened around 1100 AD that people didn't fully understand. In Europe, the church, several popes, they issued these bulls, whatever, canons, whatever you want to call them, and they basically wiped out the indigenous culture of Europe almost completely. Anybody that knew anything, any healing, any type of cultural knowledge bank was destroyed, burned, and those people were burned at the stake. They were said they were witches, they were warlocks, they were this. If you weren't like bam, completely in line with the church doctrine, they just took you outside, stabbed you, cut you, and hung you up or burned you at the stake. And if you were any kind of a healer, you had any kind of indigenous knowledge, it was deadly. And in about 200 years, they completely wiped out the indigenous culture of Europe. The tragedy of this, we cannot overemphasize. I mean, it caused the Dark Ages in Europe, of course, the Inquisition, all that stuff, but the tragedy would last for like 700 years because it left a vacuum that the church could never fill after the plagues and the diseases and the ice age that happened. Then there was just this vacuum because there was no indigenous peoples. The plagues came about because the peoples who could have stopped it were killed by the church. The church couldn't stop it. And so society just fell to the bottom, basically. And so technology and science stepped in to that vacuum. And that society, hungry for something, kept, ever more supporting the technology and the science. The church tried to stop it, but they couldn't, because the technology generated money and power, especially the weaponry. And the printing presses changed Europe. Boom. Books, and then the guns, it just changed Europe. And then it got exported out to other places. But the bottom line is, technology started to take over, and it created a new God. So the old Catholic God was dethroned. The old Islamic God was dethroned. And a new God took over, the God of money, especially money from conquest and technology. And the European failed to realize what a dangerous course he had set upon. And blacks didn't realize it either, or Chinese, or anybody else. Nobody saw the real danger in this. And around, the middle of the 1800s, it hit the tipping point where industrialization was happening so fast and moving at such a breakneck speed that it posed a danger to the very culture of man itself. And nobody could stop it, or nobody tried to stop it. And ever since the mid-1800s, the entire world has been plummeting down into the abyss with one crisis after another. At first, the crises were, 10, 15 years apart, and the governments were able to handle it. But the wars kept coming, Then you had the big wars, World War I, World War II. And after that, things picked up speed, you know, and then you had a war every 8 years, then a war, it seemed like every time you turn around, there's wars going on. And now they're constant pretty much, because we have such a technical ability to fight wars. They tried to stop the Vietnam War and put an end to wars, and they stopped that war, but they couldn't stop the rest of them. They're always doing something, especially the other countries, especially the internal wars. Then the crises start to become internal of nations. So there was a female gender crisis. You had health crises, union crises, stock market crashes, bank crises, pollution issues, racial tensions and stuff like that. And it just, you know, it was just one thing after the other. And so people started developing these think tanks to figure out solutions for these crises, but they could never keep up. By the time you got to the 1980s, and you had Reaganomics and all this other stuff like that, the people stopped trying to fix the problems. And what the leaders started to do, mainly the Republican Party, is they came up with this concept of, we can't solve the problems, so we want to create a class that can be isolated from the problems. And we want to make the problem so that we can blame other people for it, and then when the stuff hits the fan, we can isolate ourselves. We'll have a system in place of isolation so that, you know, we won't get burned by the fire. And that's what they've been doing ever since Reaganomics, so that, you know, you had the tech problem, then you had, recently you had all these bank crises, most of which were never public. Then you had the housing bubble burst back around 2006, 2007. And almost a year later you had the financial crisis. You know, about $3 trillion had to change hands to try to fix that. And they never fixed it because, you know, they never intended to fix it. They just went right back. As soon as the administration changed, they just went right back. They repealed the laws and the executive orders. And they went right back to doing the same thing that created the problem. And that's what they're doing now, pretty much. So they were never, that was never what they were trying to do. The problems just started getting worse, so bad they couldn't hide them. They keep saying that they're going to try to deal with the deficit and the budget and things like that. But, you know, for the last 30 years, they have not. There's been no attempt to do it. And they're not, that was never their intention. They keep saying in the media, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. And then they have these standoffs every once in a while to prove that they're really trying, but they're really not. Whenever they vote, they always vote to continue expanding the military budget and to continue expanding the deficit. They never, you know, they never intentionally try to shrink it. They're not trying to. It's easy to do it. That's not what they want to do, and they're not going to do it. And no president, Obama, Trump, Bush, any of them, had any idea of ever doing it, and nor will they ever, because they're hoping the thing is going to break down. When it does, that's when they're going to get paid. So, this whole thing with the old world and new world, boom, I really start to see a lot of stuff in terms of what's really going on the surface and what the Jedi really needs to know. In one of the trips overseas, I came into the Swami, and he was talking about ejaculation. So he was up there talking, and I'm like, this guy's, you know, he's saying some pretty far out things. And he spoke about, he said, the male ejaculation is not the same as orgasm. And if you learn to separate the two events in the brain, that you could prolong, you could retain your seed, a man could, and he could prolong sex for 2 to 3 hours. So I'm like, get out of Dodge. Sex for 3 hours? No, no way. And you're going to have orgasm and not ejaculate? I was thinking in my mind, how do you do that? How does that work? How do you have an orgasm is an ejaculation? And so I challenged, the brother. I mean, he wasn't a brother, but I challenged him, and he was one of these, turban-headed dudes and whatever. And he just kind of looked at me like, you poor unevolved little man boy. I mean, he was like, wow, you really don't believe this? And he started explaining it to me, and you could tell that he was using his words to try to put it in as simple terms as possible. He was like, this guy don't know anything, so let's break it down to him so that even a child can understand. And he was explaining this thing to me, and then I looked around at everybody else in the room, and I realized I was the only little knucklehead that didn't understand it, didn't believe it. And when he finished, I could tell that he was for real. And I was like, whoa. And I'm thinking in my mind, my day, could this really be true? Can you really do this? Could an average guy really do that? And he was like, yeah. And later on, when the talk was over, I went up to one of his wives. He had several wives. And they didn't really talk much, but I just kind of pushed my way in and I asked one of his wives, is what he said true? And she had the biggest smile on her face. And her smile was saying, yeah, you bet your booty it's true. That's not what she said, but the smile was like, yeah, it's true. So she just told me a few little details, and she says, I hope that you will use what I'm telling you and what my husband is telling you to help uplift and pleasure the women in America, And she was basically saying, we're trying to be nice about it, that you barbarians over there in America, you guys think you're swinging the big one, and you really been doing juvenile sex all these years and don't know it. And I felt pretty ashamed. I felt like, black men were supposed to be so potent and virile and all this, that, and the other. And here this little weird-looking guy with a turban on was satisfying 3 or 4 women way better than I was. That was humbling. But I was like, okay, if this is true, I'm going to get to the bottom of it, and I'm going to be able to do it. And it took me about 8 years, because I wasn't always able to get to the information and to the people. But, one night I was doing it. And I was like thinking to myself, dang, this is crazy stuff. Because, the woman was just having orgasmic wave after orgasmic wave after orgasmic wave. She was like, she didn't know what had happened. And I was like, I can't believe nobody in black society told me stuff like this. Where was all these magazines and blogs and all of these TV shows that's supposed to be so enlightened? Why wasn't they telling me this? I'm up here having, 30-minute sex that's kind of like, I'm like, I gotta focus so I don't prematurely ejaculate. And here it was, I could have more than one orgasm and make love for 2 hours and not, and I could be swaggering into the bedroom, So that's the kind of stuff that happened from the Jedi journey that you weren't expecting. You'd be talking to this guy about this over here, and then he would, also be talking about this other thing, or you're like, no, you can't do that. And then he would be like, oh yeah, you can, and so did it, and so did it. And then you'd try it out, you'd research it, and 2 or 3 years later, you'd find out, this is crazy, but it's true. A lot of things happen like that. Because you don't know what you don't know. And after I turned 30, I came to the crossroads. I came to that point where I stopped fighting it. I got mad and I was like, screw this. I threw all my opinions out. My opinions were just trash. And I threw them out. I stopped having opinions, for the most part. Really. Not exactly that, but that's kind of how I felt. Because my opinions had basically just been my roadblocks. They'd been my delays. Because I was always taking, in the first 5 or 6 years of my Jedi journey, I was taking like 4 steps forward and then 3 steps back. I'm like, So I'm only one step ahead. You took 7 steps and you only really made 1 step of progress. And I was constantly 4 steps ahead, 3 steps back, 4 steps ahead, 3 steps back, you know. And you're gradually creeping along the line of progress, you know. I should have been 10 times further ahead than what I was in my Jedi journey. I was kind of happy with my progress, but I'm like, dang, I should be about 10 times further ahead. Because I keep taking 4 steps forward, 3 steps back. Because I kept following my opinions, which were not facts. I didn't know who to listen to. And then I decided I need to know who to listen to. And I need to learn when to change. And before it was like I was living by error. In other words, I would make a mistake and that's how I learned. And I decided that's not the way to go. I stopped making decisions based on opinions, my own especially. I started seeking out the experts and I blindly followed them. So it became very important to know who to listen to. So what? Guess what? I stopped taking financial advice from broke people. I stopped taking relationship advice from people who had never studied human psychology and who were on one gender side or the other. I'm always for men, I'm always for women. No. Understand the human psyche dynamic first, then try to whatever. You know, I stopped taking spiritual advice from people who couldn't do stuff. You know, if you're a pastor and you can't walk on water and turn water into wine and heal the blind, get off the pulpit and shut up. Because you can't do Christianity. You're doing a fake version of it. I stopped taking my own opinions to the conclusion where they led to me making a decision that was not based on facts. If you wanted me to invest in your business, show me the checks, the revenue streams, the project concept, who's approved it, and give me two or three recommendations of people who followed your last project. Then we can talk. And so I stopped. I slammed the door on it. It's like I took my opinions and threw them in the trash and threw the trash out to the street. And I decided, you know, I'm just not going to have that many opinions anymore. From now on, until I become an expert in something, I'm not going to think I know anything until I find somebody who is. And that was a revolution that changed my life. The next thing I had to be willing to change, that's the hard part, having the courage to get out there and, you know, if you had an opinion, you know it would disagree and you think you're doing the wrong thing. But the expert said, and you learned how to pick them, and you picked an expert, and the expert says, go left, and you really want to go right. And when you get in that steering wheel and you go left, there's a pit in the pit of your stomach, you're like, this is wrong! And you know, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to crash. And then you find out, no, you don't crash, you actually get closer to your objective. And then you look down the hill and see that if you had turned right like you thought you should have, you were going to crash and burn and fall into the pit of despair. And you're like, whew, I'm glad I took the advice. And that saved me so much. I became willing to change. And that means I was willing to follow. And that's a humbling thing for an alpha male to do. And I realized alpha male doesn't mean you always make your own decisions. Alpha male means you have enough sense and courage to know who to listen to. About, you know, a few years before I finished my Jedi training, in my early 30s, I became aware of dominion. To be an effective Jedi, or what we would call an evolved human, you have to have control of your time. And I had gained some control of it. You know, to have control of your time, you have to do a very hard thing. You have to quit your job. And that's one of those things that happened to me after I threw my opinions out. I followed, and what was said to me, that the road that was laid out for me was that you got to quit your job and gain control of your time back. And you know, if I had still had my opinions, I'd be like, no, Mr. Bill, I'm not going to quit this job. I'm making too much money. Every 2 weeks I get a check, you know. And if you become an entrepreneur, you got to get your own checks. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. But I did do it. And, you know, I really started seeing. I'd seen dominion in my 20s, but I didn't quite fully understood or believe it. And what do I mean by dominion? That's the name that I give it. I don't really know the real, there's a lot of names for it. I don't know the right one. But dominion is a demigod. That's the name I call him. It's like, I know this is going to be over some of your heads. But there's a God that men worship. It's not Jesus. It's not Muhammad or Allah. It's not Buddha. It's none of that, no. A lot of people will say that's their religion, that's who they worship, but that's a lie. That's what you see on the surface of that lake. And when you dip your head under, you see dominion and all his slaves in handcuffs. You know, that's what you see. That's what's really there. Who is dominion? Dominion is the Lord of the retail corporate culture. He's a demigod of money. It's not a real God, but that's what we call him. He's similar. And that's who people really worship. They're worshiping money. I mean, if you look at it, you know, above the lake, a lot of guys are going to all these churches and temples and, you know, wearing all these things on their heads and praying 5 times a day to the east. And it's all BS. That's maybe 4 or 5% of them that's for real with that. 95% of them, they worship dominion, the god of money. And you can tell who they worship by what they spend their time doing. And dominion commands, and they give him 40 hours a week of their time, which is the most precious thing a man has. And if a God has got your time, he's got you. If you work for somebody else, you have given them your sovereignty. You are basically a servant of them. And as long as I was getting a paycheck from the big corporate cultures, they owned me. I had no sovereignty. They told me what to do with my time, and I did it. I worshipped dominion. It was hard for me to accept, but you can't be a true alpha male if you're working as a servant for somebody. If you can't take time off from work to do what you really need to do to become a Jedi, and I had said that was my main purpose at the time. So if you can't take time off to do that, you don't have sovereignty, you don't have control of yourself. You are not an alpha male at all. You're not even a beta male. You're a servant. And I stopped being a servant. And I thought I had stopped worshiping dominion, but I hadn't completely detached myself from him. Dominion is the Lord of the corporate and retail culture. And that's what's really running this country. That's what's really running the world. Dominion, even though he's a lowly demigod, he's running a lot of stuff. And here's how you can tell. If you have a religion, let's take Christianity, and it's running the country and it's the main religion, and you have it for 1,000 years, after 1,000 years, the world should be a perfect reflection of that religion. If you've been practicing this thing, because if men are really worshiping these gods and this religion and the religion's gods and its tenets and its themes, then they would be building communities and societies around this thing because they're doing all of this worshiping, whatever. And after 1,000 years, the world would look like a perfect world. It would be a perfect reflection, a mirror reflection of the themes of Jesus and all these other people. Or it would be a world that perfectly reflects the themes in the core life of Buddha, or Muhammad, or whatever, or Krishna, or one of these things. It does not. After 2,000 years of all this worship, the world does not reflect Jesus at all, or any kind of God like that. No, no. When you look around, this world we have is a reflection of dominion. It's a perfect mirror reflection of the image of dominion, the corporate and retail culture. We're about money in this world, pure and simple. That's what this world is. That's what it's been built to model, and that's what it reflects. It reflects dominion. So when you look under that surface, you know, when you look above the surface, you see these crosses and these sickles and the red and all the different signs of the different religions. And yeah, everybody's waving those banners, but that's just an illusion. When you look under the surface of that lake, you see dominion. That's it. The demigod of money. That's what's running things around here. So it makes you, really stop and think. This God dominion, this demigod dominion is running stuff. And he's telling men, you're going to give me 40 hours a week, buddy. And he transfers a small amount of money into your account, but you can't keep it. This is how bad dominion is. At the end of the month, he sends you bills, and you got to bring the money right back. You don't get to keep it, stupid. You think dominion is giving you something, but no. He transfers it into your account so that you can transfer it back. You're like a spur gear on a sprocket gear. You're just part of the machinery making it all run. You don't get to keep nothing. You don't actually accumulate anything every month. You're basically, it's like a wave. It comes in, and then you give it back to the ocean. You don't keep it, stupid. Dominion doesn't give you, that's not who he is. Dominion is about taking. He's not about giving. And that's why black men are so poor. They run up into this church thinking that God has given them something that and it's all false. They're worshiping really dominion, because when on Monday morning they get up, they worship dominion until Friday night, late. And then they go back to worshiping themselves. And Sunday morning, they pretend that they're worshiping something else for about 4 or 5 hours so that they can, appear to be whatever. But they've never stopped worshiping dominion. They've never stopped. And as a Jedi, learning what I learned to see this clearly and to understand how to deal with the world accordingly, how to put that into my relationship context, how to deal with my money, whatever. It changed so many things in my life, and it's like, when I learned about dominion, I'll tell you when I really learned about dominion in a few minutes, when I tell you that when I tried to actually use the force, I found out I had not totally cut all my ties with dominion. What's the force? I saw Star Wars and I was like, whoa, the force, wow, get your lightsaber and wave it around. But the force is real. That's no joke. It's not science fiction at all. It's called the quantum field and the auric field, and people have been studying it for years. They built 5 or 6 huge facilities in the world just to study the quantum field. And I don't know what they've come up with so far. I know that, the medicine men and the swamis and the gurus, they've been using this field to cure, miraculously for centuries now. And myself, I have used it to heal, major healings. And I've used it to, to create tantra, to help people expand their consciousness and stuff like that. And so, I know that it's there because I can use it, and I have used it. And people have seen me in the video making women orgasm without touching them and stuff like that, which is minor parts of how you use the force. Of course, we don't call it the force, we call it what it really is. The energy field, which humans have an energy body to interact with it. I was kind of surprised when they used that theme in the movies, because I'm like, wow, people normally don't talk about stuff like that. So, The Force, the Force, the Force. The problem is if you're trying to use the Force to do anything, it's hard to do. In order to do that, you know, you have to realize that in the movie, the training for the Jedi is almost identical to the training of shaman in West Africa. And I thought, does George Lucas really know about this? Or is this just a coincidence? And I don't know the answer to that. But I can tell you, I've been through shaman training, and the Jedi training that they show in the movies, the fantasy stuff, is identical in every detail. I mean, it's a little more deep to it, but that's basically it. And so, you look at the comic books and things like that, and what you realize is that the comic books of the 50s and 60s, all that stuff came true. I mean, we're not flying through the air like Superman yet, but most of that comic book stuff is now reality. I mean, that's just it. So I think they were basing a lot of that science fiction stuff on science that they knew a little teeny bit about, and they suspected might become more every day down the road. But the bottom line is that the Force is very, very real. I mean, that energy field is really, really real. And I think in the next 20, 30 years, you know, people are going to start doing a lot more stuff. There's already patents out about it and things like that, you know. But you can't use that field to do anything unless your heart can make a connection, a strong connection, to the mind of God. I'm talking about the big God, the one God, the central intelligence in the universe. And it sounds good, but it's very hard to do that. When I learned all of these techniques and stuff like that, and you know, you go to try to do them, you find out that you're not as connected to God as you thought you were. You try to do healings, you try to do tantric work, you try to do this, that, and the other, and you try to move the natural forces, and you find out you can't. And so you have to learn how to make a connection to the elemental forces in nature. But the first thing that you really got to do is you've got to connect your heart to the mind of God. And at first I couldn't do that because my heart was still connected to dominion and to the money. I'm just telling you what the real thing is. I thought I disconnected because I quit my job, but I was still tied into the money, and that was really still more my God than the big God. So I had to start all over again. I had to start from scratch. I had to go back and really understand, you know, how do I tap into my divine self, and how do I really, you know, start living as if the big God is living through me. And eventually I did make that connection. And once I connected to God, I was able to start doing small things, you know, in nature and using the Force to heal and do and whatever. And I built it up over the years. And most of the people who try to do these things, who take these initiations and try to become a Jedi, if you want to use that word, they can't do it. Why? Because, you know, if you're connected to all these religions and all of these deity personas and to dominion and all this kind of false belief stuff, you're not connected to the big God. So it blocks you. It's like you're trying to make a call with your cell phone, but you don't have no cell service in that area. Can't do it. You're not connected to God. Not the real one, not the big one, not to the mind of it. It's like you're trying to get on the internet, but you don't have an internet connection. So you're trying to browse the websites, but it says no internet connection because you're not connected to God. It's like you go to the bank and you're trying to take money out, but you don't got nothing in the account. You never made a deposit. You can't withdraw from God because you never made a deposit into it. And that's what most people discover. And so it's very humbling because all of their religious and all of the stuff that they've been spouting, all of these beliefs and this, that, and the other, they realized it was just opinions. They weren't listening to the right people. They can't do anything. I mean, all of these ministers and pastors, they fake trying to do stuff, but they can't actually do it. They can't actually do what the masters used to do and what we still do. The Jedi journey is like, you know, I talk about it, but really It has some lessons for all men, whether you want to be a Jedi or not. I can't give you the whole story now in this one video, can't do it. The reality is, I'm going to be posting these videos all for the next few months until the entire story is told. Everybody thinks that he or she is tight with God until they test the theory I just gave you, until they try to actually do something that's what we call supernatural, or what we call using the forces of nature. Then you really see if you're connected to the big boy or not. You can pray all you want, you can make all the incantations and all the formulas and take all the herbs you want. Not going to help you. Not going to help you when you try to actually do stuff, when you try to actually be like God. In my late 30s, I felt that I had completed my training, at least the first half of it. I felt that I was now a full Jedi. And normally, like in the movies and stuff, when the Jedi becomes ready for graduation and all like that, he has to make his lightsaber. I wish I had a toy one, so I could wave it around. And, he has to make his lightsaber. That's what the force flows through it, And that looks good in the movies, guy fighting with lightsaber and, all that kind of stuff like that. But what really actually happens in real life, when you're ready to graduate into the first stage of whatever, then, you have to choose your culture, your system. And that's what you got to do. So, in the real world, I was promoted to master because, it was recognized that I had mastered a number of systems and orders. And, the ancestors and the deities recognized me as having mastered those things. And so they required all the people who used to teach me to acknowledge that I was now the master, and they had to listen to me. And it was very humbling at the time. And, even before that, I felt that I was a Jedi because I could do a lot of stuff. But I didn't make a lightsaber, no. What I had to do was I had to decide what was going to be my personal culture. I had to choose how I was going to make money. Was I going to marry, and what type of woman was I going to marry? What tribe will I join? And what was going to be my role in society? That's what is meant by graduation. You learn how to do all of this stuff. Now, how are you going to apply it to the world? What's going to be your MO? What's going to be your blueprint, your life system, your motive, your code of conduct? That's what the Jedi has to decide when he graduates. And then you have to live by that. And I looked around, I didn't like what I saw, so I created my own system. And I called it Grand Trine. And that's a whole separate story right there. I'll probably, near the end of this series, 6 or 7 months from now, I'll probably do a whole video on that whole piece right there, because that was a monstrous thing. I created my own system, called it the Grand Trine system. And so far, it's been around about 7 years. There was a lot of stuff that happened prior to that. And it's directly impacted thousands of people, and indirectly healed or impacted tens of thousands of people. So I'm pretty pleased about that. And there's a lot of books that I wrote, Awakening being the one that, I get the most feedback on. Awakening the Master Feminine is a bestseller, and that's been one of the more popular books in Grand Trine. But the Master Masculine book is trying to catch up, and I'm hoping that it will. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in the Jedi Chronicles, we're going to talk about martial arts, how to teach, how to make love, how to live in an extraordinary manner. And to do this, you got to know the tools of nature, because the power of the Jedi flows from nature. And that's a metaphor, yes. But actually, it's pretty close to the truth. And when you see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about nature, you're going to see why I'm saying that. So, some of the subjects that we have to cover are the tree of life, the life cycles, the Bagua, the archetype systems, the 7-star system, the house of the man, the house of the woman, the energy fields, the realms of being, the portals, brain dendrite patterns, neurochemistry, the endocrine system, lucid dreaming, manifestation, and more. And you're going to see, as we're studying these things, that culture and life systems is mightier than the sword, mightier than the pen. It's a very powerful thing. And it's hard to deal with finance, relationships, and family life without it. Not really. So I recommend the book Awakening the Master Masculine to any man who considers himself in Jedi training, or just manhood training, I guess. Education today is so flawed. Most of it is really miseducation. You spend all this time in class, you spend all this time studying stuff that you never use, and they don't teach you how to live, how to make money, how to make love, how to do all the important stuff. They leave that out, so you got to pay somebody to show you how to do it. And culture takes up the slack in that. And in these Jedi Chronicles, we're going to be talking about all that stuff. In a way, I don't think you can anticipate at all that we're going to do it. I think you're going to be completely surprised at some of the stuff that we're going to say and how we're going to say it and how it can be used in your life. These Jedi Chronicles are about my journey of what happened to me after I decided to become a Jedi. But they're really about you, black man. It's really about what black men have been going through concurrent during the times that I was doing this, which is about 18, 19 years that I was on the Jedi journey. And so it's a story of what was happening to black men during this entire time. I look at things that's very different than what most blogs and magazines and posts and how they look at things. So I hope you'll do me the honor of following these chronicles on YouTube. And I'm going to dedicate, the Jedi Chronicles to the elders. It was older men who helped me, who saw that I was vulnerable, and who really are the ones who helped me on my Jedi journey. They're the ones who stepped in and redirected me and taught me and mentored me, and I owe so much to them. They were both male and female elders. And so I'm playing it forward here. I'm passing some of this information on to the next generation of men. And we dedicate and cherish the memory of our elders. Again, I hope you'll follow me on these chronicles. Wakanda forever.